Hello, everyone. It's Jason Garbus. I'm back, and it is the beginning of the year. So you know what that means. It's time for annual vendor and analyst surveys about the state of Zero Trust and what to expect in the new year, in this case, 2023. So today, for the price of admission, you get, we're going to review three different surveys and documents that are publicly available, talk through them, compare and contrast, and see what we all think of the actual state of Zero Trust in 2023. So let's go ahead and dive in and get started. Okay, we're going to start off with this research report from Okta, which came out just a couple months ago in September of 2022. They call it the State of Zero Trust Security 2022. So obviously, end of year, a little bit backwards looking. Okta, of course, is one of the leading identity management companies with a broad platform, and they're definitely part of the Zero Trust community and vendor ecosystem. So let's see what they have to say. Obviously, their customers and their perspective is from an identity-centric point of view, which makes a lot of sense for Zero Trust. But of course, there's other perspectives and angles in there as well, which we'll see. This is a fairly long report. You can see it's about 45 pages, so we're clearly not going to go through it page by page. I picked a few highlights to talk through. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at this page here. Make it a little bit bigger. So what this is all companies, and it's a year-over-year comparison of the answer to the question, does your organization have a defined Zero Trust security initiative today, or that you're planning in the coming months? So this is both currently active as well as coming in the next 12 to 18 months. And you can see pretty substantial growth over the last 3-4 years, where early on it was a small minority, 16% growing, and now you can see it's plateauing a little bit with 97%. It's not much more to go up from there to 100%. So that's clearly, of the organizations that Okta surveyed, that's a very essentially a unanimous vote that says, yes, we're either doing one or we're planning on starting one. So let's look at the breakdown there. So this is just over the last 2 years, and you can see the breakdown is the dark blue is they've already implemented Zero Trust, and the lighter blue or medium blue is in the next 12 to 18 months. So clearly there's a progression where, assuming it's the same audience, between 2021 and 2022, the percentage that already implemented it went up from 24 to 55%, and then the remaining diminished because clearly so many of those 65% up here moved into this 55% category. So that makes perfect sense in terms of people progressing. And I guess the good news is that if these numbers were flat, that would be an indication that a lot of those organizations have really stalled or haven't gotten started. So this is a good indication that organizations are really engaging this in the real world and making real progress. Okay, next up, I want to look at this survey here. And I thought this was pretty interesting. So what this is saying is rank the following Zero Trust requirements in terms of priority. And you can see this is the fairly consistent set of five pillars plus the analytics and orchestration that make up most of the maturity models in our world. So data, devices, networks, people, and workloads, and analytics and orchestration. The one that's missing is governance, and that's just not on Okta's radar, I guess. So what's interesting here is, first of all, if you look at already completed, you can see these are low single-digit percentages. So clearly not of this survey, even though 97% say that they're active, and if I go back for a second, 55% they've already implemented Zero Trust as an initiative. Clearly, this is a good indication that kind of as integrity check, right? Zero Trust isn't once and done. It's an initiative and a program that you keep doing. So it's pretty sensible that only 4% of the people think, okay, yeah, I'm done with data, I'm done with devices, and really it's things that are ongoing. Let's take a look at these other three. So you can see it's ranked by priority: critical, high, and moderate priority, with light purple as a low priority. And what's interesting about this is that data and devices are really basically tied in terms of critical priority, and almost tied in terms of high priority and moderate priority. And then you can see network, it lags behind a little bit in terms of critical, and even adding these two up, then down to people and workloads. So it's really interesting that data is such a emphasis, even though really as an industry, and maybe this is why, right? I don't think we've really solved data protection. I also find there's a little bit, at least in my mind, a little bit of fuzziness between data and a workload. In most cases, people aren't accessing, in many cases, people aren't accessing data directly, right? If it's structured data in a database, for example, it's almost exclusively accessed, at least for normal users, through an application that is a workload. If it's unstructured data, documents, files, and things like that, then clearly they are accessing it directly. They're accessing the data directly. So I don't know how much to read into this, whether people think about data and just thinking about this as structured file-based data, or they're also thinking about the data they access through the workload. So there's definitely, in my mind, I think, to me, workload should be a higher priority to this. I can't argue with the survey results, right? This is just my opinion, but I wonder how much of this a big emphasis on data would also or could also be addressed by securing workloads through zero trust access policies to those workloads, combined perhaps with application access policies. I don't have access to the raw data here. It would be really interesting to do some follow-up or think about how those two might be tied together. All right, let's look at a couple more things here in Okta. This one is a little bit self-serving. The question is, among the C-level respondents, how important is identity to your overall zero trust security strategy? And you can see that of these folks, 98% said that it was either important or business critical, and only 2% it was neither important or unimportant. Now, clearly, this is a little bit of a self-selecting audience, given that these folks are probably all Okta customers. They probably all do treat identity as an important element. Having said that, even if they weren't Okta customers, even if this survey weren't sponsored by Okta, I would still be reassured by and expect that identity would be considered either important or business critical, because it really is an important part of it. So I don't want to kind of put any doubt in your mind or question the results. I think this is a pretty healthy response, even if it comes from an identity vendor. All right, one more data point from Okta that I wanted to compare or talk about briefly, which was this regional comparison. So Okta broke down the data by the region of the organization. You can see Asia Pacific is in the maroon, EMEA is in the orange, North America is in the teal, and Global 2000, which is not a region clearly, in the green. And they're the three of these are pretty well clustered down here. And what this scale is looking at is the balance between focusing on usability up here on the left or security on the right. And obviously the midpoint is 3. So what's interesting is that these three all emphasize security more than usability. And the Europe, Middle East, and Africa organizations emphasize usability a hair more than security. So I don't know what to read into that. It is interesting that in general, Europe, especially with GDPR and their privacy protections, is actually more aware and more controlling around security, at least around privacy from that perspective. And maybe that's why these organizations, they kind of take it for granted, right? Hey, we work in the European Union, we have these fairly strict privacy requirements already imposed on the enterprises that we work with. So maybe they're thinking that part of the problem is solved, or at least has some controls around it. And maybe that's why they say, okay, given that, we really need to emphasize usability. Whereas in other regions, perhaps they feel, no, we got a lot of problems and weaknesses in security, and there's no universal level of maturity because of GDPR. That could be why. That's just a possibility. All right, let's take a look. Let's shift here and take a look at Zscaler. So this one came out in just a few weeks ago. They call it the State of Zero Trust Transformation 2023. Zscaler, of course, is a leading zero trust platform provider. So let's take a look what they have to say. This is, again, is a very long report, 40 pages here. I wanted to pick just a few of these and talk through them. So in this case, what the respondents say is that 68% of the respondents, of the IT leaders, they either agree that secure cloud transformation is impossible with legacy network security infrastructure, or that zero trust network access has clear advantage over traditional firewalls and VPNs when it comes to securing remote access to applications. It's I think it makes sense to combine those things. I mean, what they're clearly trying to do is get a headline that says, okay, 2/3 of organizations think this thing, which is very forward-looking and really essentially embracing zero trust. I am certainly a big fan of taking zero trust, and I'm a strong believer that secure cloud transformation is impossible with legacy network security infrastructure. That's for sure. And I also agree that zero trust network access has clear advantage over traditional network or remote access solutions like VPNs or network securities like security solutions like firewalls. So I certainly agree with that 68%. It would be interesting to look at the 32% who didn't agree with that and to try to understand their thinking a little bit. Okay, let's take a look at okay, this 90% number. So it's a good headline, right? More than 90% of organizations that have started their migration to the cloud have implemented or in the process of implementing zero trust security in the next 12 months. There's a couple of layers here. They're basically saying is organizations, forward-looking technology adopting organizations are the vast majority of them are already embracing zero trust. And that makes sense, especially as you move to a cloud environment, but in particular, infrastructure or platform as a service, a little bit more than software as a service. Zero trust makes a ton of sense for a lot of reasons that we talked about in this, on my chats and writing and things like that. So I thought that was interesting and certainly a good data point. Here it is. This 54% of IT leaders indicated they believe VPNs or perimeter firewalls are both ineffective at protecting against cyber attacks or providing visibility into application traffic and attacks. So again, this is a little bit of a leading question, I guess, but what it's essentially saying is that around half folks think that traditional security is ineffective against defending as well as providing visibility. And perhaps that's, I can't quite parse this, right? Maybe the 46% have simpler organizations, or maybe they've deployed things in a way that allows them to actually achieve one of those two. Because remember, the 54% is that they agree with both of those statements. Okay, let's take a look at this. The main barriers to leveraging the full potential of the cloud. So this is clearly check more than one because this adds up to a lot more than 100%, but almost half say that the challenge of securing data in the cloud, and this is why wouldn't you adopt the cloud? And I think that that's reasonable, but perhaps a little misguided only because I think in many organizations, the on-premises environment, their traditional environment, does not do a very good job at securing data. And moving to the cloud environment typically does a couple of things. One is you're moving to a professionally managed, environment that is probably much more highly available and resilient than what you're running internally. Not always, but usually. It also, because you're moving things, you're deliberately taking a step to look at your data and think about your access and your processes around that. And that's a great catalyst for you to not just adopt zero trust, but to rethink around who should have access to what, and to start with a little bit of a clean slate in terms of the data and how it's categorized or classified and who has access to it. So I think that moving to the cloud is actually a great opportunity to start in a cleaner environment, start from scratch, and do it right, or at least close to right. 42% say that network complexity and security hardware are hard to scale. Now, clearly, security hardware is not typically relevant in the cloud. And if you're moving things into a cloud environment like infrastructure or platform as a service, and you're still trying to use your traditional network security hardware, you're going down the wrong pathway. You really need to look at cloud native mechanisms and zero trust approaches that are not going to be hardware based. They're going to be cloud based and let you do that. Now, network complexity is another issue, and I completely understand that because many enterprise networks are very complex, and it's oftentimes hard to glue together a perhaps direct connection or wide area connection to cloud hosted environments in a way that doesn't cause problems with routing, DNS, overlapping IP address ranges, failover scenarios. There's a great deal of complexity there. And I think that this is one of the reasons that so many of the zero trust vendors really start with remote access only and don't start with or don't do a really good job of solving on-premises users' access to on-premises applications. And I think that's probably a reflection of that. And then finally, the 33% say that inconsistent connectivity and poor remote access experience for users is a barrier to leveraging the full potential of the cloud. And I think that feels misguided to me, because traditional VPNs are notorious for providing a poor user experience and inconsistent connectivity. Whereas moving to a modern zero trust-based approach, the vendors and the platforms do provide a much better, much more reliable and much more consistent user experience, especially those platforms that you can use in the same way for both remote access to cloud and on-prem resources, as well as on-prem users accessing on-prem and cloud-based resources. The right Zero Plus Trust platforms will give that to you in a way that is consistent and give a good user experience. So I think maybe the other way to do it is to say that, well, 77%, excuse me, 67% of the respondents don't think that that's a problem. Only 33% do. Maybe that's another way to look at it. This next question is interesting. They're talking about hybrid work, and this survey section is about reasons for implementing or planning to implement a zero trust-based hybrid work infrastructure. So what they're saying of the respondents say, 52% of them say that, well, employees have inconsistent access experience between on-premises and cloud-based applications and data. And therefore, we want to move to a zero trust-based model that gives users consistent experience no matter where the resources are. This makes a ton of sense to me. And I'm a big fan of doing this, what's sometimes called ZTNA everywhere or universal ZTNA, where regardless of where the user is, whether they're on premises or remote, and regardless of where the resources are, they get the same consistent experience. And they use the same mechanism to connect. They have the same identity and authentication and step-up authentication experience. It's a big win all around. It not only makes it better for the end users, it also makes it easier for the organization, because they don't have to juggle and handle multiple access methods and multiple policy models. They also indicated that employees have productivity loss because of network access issues, and they get the same thing, right? Not able to access apps or data from personal devices. And both of these things, of course, can be addressed with zero trust. But what's interesting about really all three of these, that these are not technical or security benefits. These are business benefits. Now you can make your users, your employees, more productive at doing whatever their job is. And that's a big win. And that's a good reason to highlight when you as a security professional are looking to promote or sell or start a zero trust initiative inside of your organization. Okay, now I want to wrap up here. I'm going to skip ahead to the recap slide if I can find it. Here we go. So the three main recommendations from the Zscaler one are: organizations need to reconsider their understanding of zero trust, looking at it as an enabler of secure digital transformation and a driver of business outcomes. So I think this is really important. We're security professionals. We love thinking about and talking about security, and zero trust, because it is a security-oriented strategy, tends to kind of drive our mindset that way. But really, it's much bigger than that. And in order for us to get our organizations to adopt it, to really not just adopt it, but embrace it and support it enthusiastically, we need to be able to talk about that in business terms, in things that they understand, whether it's financial benefits, user productivity benefits, or business agility. There's need to for further education to dispel the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around zero trust. So this one's okay. It's a little bit around security has, in many organizations, a reputation of being the Department of No, or blockers, or the business impediment division. And I think this is really around shifting that and helping. I'm a big fan of security organizations recasting themselves as partners to enable business productivity. And zero trust is sometimes viewed negatively, especially the name. Sometimes non-technical people view this as almost an insult. They're like, wait a minute, you're telling me you don't trust me? So there is sometimes some internal politics or internal selling that needs to happen. I think that there's so many non-technical and non-security benefits of zero trust that security teams really should embrace that. And I think that's really a combination of what I said between 2 and 3, where really this type of secure business agility can be a competitive business advantage. Not only are you more resilient, not only are you spending less time and effort on meeting compliance controls and reporting them and satisfying auditors, but you actually have the ability to innovate and create new value and do new things that you couldn't do before. Okay, so let's talk about the third one, which is by my friend Chris Steffen, Managing Research Director at Enterprise Management Associates. And this one is called Advancing Zero Trust Priorities. And if we look at this, let's dive in. This one is about 12 pages, so it's a little more compact. So the first question is your organization investigating or planning a zero trust project? So interesting here is this number here, 61.8%, is considerably lower than both the Okta and the Zscaler numbers, which were closer to 90% or I think 98%. So, I wonder who is answering this differently, or maybe some of these 31.9% answered no if they're already in progress. I don't know exactly how to parse that. I think that it could just be an artifact of the survey respondents. I mean, this is still a healthy number. I would expect it to be higher. But it could be that the organizations that were surveyed here are a little bit more conservative. Let's take a look at this. What's the primary driver? So data security, data protection, a clear top driver here. So that's consistent with what we saw in the previous surveys. So that's clearly a problem and a challenge for organizations. Notice here some of the number 2, cloud adoption, cloud access, another great reason to embrace zero trust. And that's a very healthy second driver for this. And improved IT management is a third, where zero trust will give you better visibility for a variety of reasons, because you're using more modern tools, because you're using a default deny model that forces you to have a good set of assets, an asset inventory, and forces you to define policies around who can access what. Okay, so this is asking the question of the folks who said that they're not planning a zero trust initiative. So this is pretty interesting here. So the number one answer, and you can see clearly this is going to be selecting more than one, is lack of budget or funding. And that's pretty interesting, because we found in many cases that actually going down a zero trust journey can free up money. It can actually contribute to the budget. Typically directly because of cost savings. In many cases, there's small cost savings, small to moderate cost savings that can be accomplished by retiring certain IT tools or access tools like network access control or VPNs. There, in some cases, are a much larger amount of spending that can be reduced by turning down or eliminating wide area networks, or for more distributed organizations, branch offices or regional offices can in many cases have their networking and security infrastructure reduced. So look at your organization and think about that. I think that this is not necessarily wrong that this is why they're not doing it, but I think perhaps the folks there are not seen deeply enough into zero trust to understand that it can actually, it doesn't have to be a big expensive project. Technical challenge is too great. Or no clear direction on how to begin. Those are both good and reasonable concerns. I think that, however, in terms of the first one here, zero trust doesn't have to be super complicated. It can be, and probably is often thought of that way because it is so broad as a security strategy. You can easily get overwhelmed and think about, oh my goodness, I have to use this thing to secure all users and everything in my organization. And the clear answer is no, you don't on day one, but there's going to be not highly technical, not very difficult initial projects that you can undergo that will help your organization move forward. And that's going to help you also address this one, which is start small. We've got lots of guidance that we can provide in terms of how to get started step by step, or with some initial on-ramps. And I think that will go a long way towards addressing some of these. Last one I wanted to talk about is concern that zero trust may negatively impact the organization's business operations. And I think that that's perhaps looking at it from the perspective of traditional networking changes or traditional IT or security changes. And the reality is that if you do zero trust right, even partially right, you're going to improve your business operations. You're going to use it not to say, hey, we're jamming down these changes from a network and security perspective, from a user access perspective. The right way to think about it is, let me look at my business operations, my business processes, my user access methods, my employee onboarding and offboarding processes. What's wrong with them? Why are they taking so long? What areas of friction are there? And how can we improve those? And how do we improve them securely by using a zero trust approach to do it? There's a lot of benefits there that I think would actually really mitigate this as a concern, and in fact, turn it on its head. All right, let's take a look at this one here before we wrap up. So please rate the following statements about a potential zero trust implementation, obviously inside of your organization. And you can see the blue here is the percent that agree, and the red is the percent that disagree. So the good news, I guess, on some of this is that our organization has the skills and talent necessary to adopt and implement zero trust. That's a pretty high level of confidence, 89%. Regulatory frameworks and specifications are important. So this might be the fact that there are, for example, federal mandates here in the United States, or that there's enough structure in some of those frameworks to give them, the organization, some guidance on how to approach zero trust. This is a good number here. Almost 90%, 88.7% say that implementing zero trust delivers business benefits in addition to security benefits. So that's great. That's a great understanding. And that, I think, is the first step toward starting down a zero trust initiative that's going to be enthusiastically supported by the line of business, by application owners, by end users. And other divisions outside of IT and security will be part of zero trust project planning. Again, a little bit lower, but still in line here, indicating that the respondents really understand that zero trust done properly has to cross those silos, cross the divisions. It has to include non-security and non-technical, non-IT folks in order to be successful. 90% almost, 89% say that implementing zero trust will positively impact operations throughout my organization. So that's great. And if we go back here, that 89% is a little bit different than the 24%. But again, this 24% is out of the subset that said they're not investigating this, whereas this answer here is going to be across the whole survey. So clearly, the ones who are implementing it, the majority, understand this well. So that's good, and that's appealing. All right. So let's wrap up this this kind of meta survey, if you will, talking through these three surveys. Number one, it's great that there's data out there from organizations that's publicly available that lets us look at and think about the ways that different organizations, different types of enterprises are approaching zero trust. There's a lot of commonality between these surveys. There's also some differences, which is what you'd expect. And I think kind of want these diverse opinions. I'm really encouraged by this in terms of the percentage of organizations surveyed that are adopting and embracing zero trust, and the barriers that are perceived, I think, are all easily overcome. In terms of education, I think we as an industry need to do a better job of highlighting some of the case studies and benefits, whether they're qualitative or quantitative, to be able to share how different enterprises in different sizes, of different shapes and different locations have approached zero trust and the benefits that they've gotten out of it. I think as an enterprise, we would love to have you share and talk about how you've approached this, the challenges that you had, and the benefits that you've gained from it. I think there's a lot to be said for communicating that among our peers. It's all really early days in terms of zero trust, even though it feels like zero trust as an initiative, as a strategy, is ubiquitous because 80 or 90% of organizations are doing it. It's still early days in terms of, I think, substantial, solid, meaty wins and benefits that we can talk about. And it's very, very early days in terms of quantifying that. And I think that those are areas of future work that I'm looking forward to. So thank you for joining. Please reach out with any comments or questions, and would love your feedback. Thank you, and have a great day.